we're going to be doing today is we're going to be taking a look in detail at what many people would consider to be one of the most iconic and classic motorcycles of all time. We're going to be talking about some of the people behind this magnificent machine, and we're going to be looking at some of the technical features that make it so special. This is the Godet-Egli-Vincent. It's not a Vincent, it's not an Egli as such. It's made by Patrick Godet in the Godet factory in northern France. It's registered as a Godet motorcycle, and it's the Godet Sport GT. All new in 2016, and it was built to order. The key people involved in being here today are, first of all, David Lancaster, who's a very well-known member of the Vincent Owners Club. The second person to mention is my dear friend Stephen Whittaker, who had the vision to commission this wonderful motorcycle. The third person is Fritz Egli, who was responsible for the design concept of the chassis. And the last person, and by no means least, is Patrick Godet, who created this wonderful machine. The Egli part of the name comes from the chassis, the spine chassis, which is a huge tube this diameter, which gives the chassis the rigidity that it needs. So it's Fritz Egli's chassis which forms part of this wonderful machine. And the Vincent name, of course, comes from the motor, the powerhouse of this beast. And this is a replica of, or an improvement on, the Black Shadow specification Vincent engine. This particular model is 1330cc, so it's over Black Shadow specification, which would have been 1000cc. And it has other features about the machine which enhance its performance and make it much more usable as a modern motorcycle. The factory are making a couple a week for export all over the world. You can order whatever specification you want. This particular one has the flat bars and the conventional riding position for touring, and makes it, to my mind, a much more comfortable machine to ride. A work of art. Fantastic. Well done, Patrick. God bless you.
My name's David Lancaster. I'm a Vincent enthusiast, a Vincent owner. I've been around Vincents all my life, so my father had Vincents. And I'm now near to the end of making a film about Philip Vincent, the man behind the motorcycles, along with Phil Irving. And we've travelled the world looking for great interviewees. We've interviewed his family, record setters, people who worked with Vincent at the factory. This is one of the great Vincent motorcycles, a special, you could call it a hybrid, but actually it's very much in the tradition of what Philip Vincent and Phil Irving built back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. Fritz Egli is the guy that designed the frame here. He was a big fan of the standard Vincent, but found on the hill climbs, which he won in Switzerland, that a lighter, more conventional frame would be better. By this time it was the mid-60s, so suspension technology had come on a long way from the 40s. So Fritz built this frame which has got the oil at the top of the motorcycle, the same as the Vincent. Really simple, really elegant, very strong, and at either end you've got more conventional suspension. Fritz worked around with this, he modified his own Black Shadow. He came up with this frame on which he won the 1966 or 67 Swiss Hill Climb Championship. I think he might have won for 2 years. And alongside this, he always had the idea that he would be producing cafe racer specials. A very entrepreneurial guy, Fritz Egli. So they began to build these. They sold them into the UK, to America, some to Italy. It was a very small-scale manufacturing enterprise in a village in Switzerland. But what he would do, because Vincent motorcycles at that stage were quite cheap, would be buy an engine or even buy a motorcycle and take the engine and install them in the Egli frame. And from then on, it became what a lot of people would consider the ultimate cafe racer of the 60s. So the Norvin was a Vincent in a Norton frame. It was a great motorcycle. The big difference with the Egli is that this frame was designed for the Vincent engine. It's lower and lighter than most Norvins, and they do steer incredibly well. They steer really like not a modern race bike, but a more modern motorcycle from the 70s or 80s, and they were designed in the 60s. What else do I say about Fritz? He's a fascinating guy. At the age of, certainly in his early 70s, he took a Hayabusa with a sidecar attached and did over 200 miles an hour at Bonneville Salt Flats. You know, that's what to do in your 70s, isn't it? He's quite a quiet man. He's quite modest, but he knows very well what he's done, and what he did, you know, is a great legacy. And in parallel to this, in the 70s, a Frenchman called Patrick Godet began to get into Vincent motorcycles. He very soon was racing motorcycles, and he did a lot of touring on Vincent's, quite a lot of it with my father, and I got to know him. And then he began to look at what he could build, again as a short run production special. And he built an Egli frame with an engine that he brought back from Argentina. Lots of Vincents went to Argentina in the late 40s. And that began the Godet brand, the Godet workshop. What he wanted to do was to make sure Fritz Egli was part of the project. Quite a few people have made replica Egli frames, and most of them are very good, some are less good. What Patrick, being a perfectionist, wanted to do was to make sure that Fritz Egli was happy with this motorcycle and was on board. So he drove to Switzerland with 2 of the motorcycles he'd built and arranged to see Fritz, and they became lifelong friends. And I've spent some time with the pair of them, and they were almost like a father and son, I think would be fair to say. Very much the same view of the Vincent motorcycle, you know, that it should be fast, it should handle really well, it should stop really well. Not necessarily be like a modern bike, but eliminate a lot of the hassles of a very old motorcycle. So, you know, most of this motorcycle is new. These bikes are produced just outside of Rouen in Normandy in France, and the workshop is carrying on the tradition after Patrick passed away. And the guys that worked there were the people Patrick trained. And I've visited there quite a few times now over the years, obviously mainly when Patrick was there. And it's beautiful. It's a mini factory. A friend of mine said, not only do I want my motorcycle made there, he's got one of these, but I'd probably undergo open heart surgery there. It's so clean and so immaculate. And they make the frames there, they do the painting there, they assemble the engines there. It's an amazing outfit. And it's young guys building them, which is great, because, you know, those skills that quite often you hear people, oh, nobody's got any skills to work on these old bikes. I think that's not true, because if you go to the Godet workshop, there's 6 or 7 guys in their 20s or 30s or maybe 40s, and they're all really enthused about building these bikes.
The heart of this beast is this all-new Vincent Black Shadow replica engine. It's based on the Black Shadow specifications at the bottom end, but the top end is different in that it's 1330cc. It has a 5-speed gearbox. It also has a pair of twin 36mm Mikuni carburetors, and it has electric start, which is tucked up underneath the engine there below the casing, so no kick starting. Power output of this engine is measured at 100 brake horsepower at the crank. To put that in perspective, the standard Black Shadow produced 55 brake horsepower, and the Black Lightning had 70 brake horsepower at the crank. And so this engine, this 1330cc engine, has the potential to be as quick as any other. It pulls like a train in every gear, oodles of torque, and it's just fabulous to ride.
The exhaust pipes, Patrick built these from mathematical equations and drawings which were done by Phil Irving, who was Vincent's right-hand man, and it allows you access to the timing side here. It's got a Gold Star silencer. It gives a really nice exhaust note on these things, and you can still, at the Godet factory, you can order these in lots of styles. There's a full cafe racer with low clip-ons and rear sets. This is a sort of medium style, and a really comfortable motorcycle that you can easily do 200 or 300 miles on. Even though it's virtually a modern motorcycle, I would say the roots of this really go back to certainly 1946 when they launched the Series B, and that was where they pioneered having the oil tank at the top to give a high degree of rigidity. It obviously saves space. You don't have an oil tank here as you would have done on a conventional motorcycle in the 50s and 40s, and very good suspension and very good brakes. So Vincent Motorcycles never made a vehicle or motorcycle without rear suspension, which was very unusual in the 30s and in the 40s. The Vincent owners who know about Fritz Egli and know about Patrick Godet look at this as a perfectly legitimate Vincent motorcycle. And anyone who tells you different, I really don't think they know what they're talking about.
Cold starting procedure with this is fairly straightforward. It's fuel on here, and then we have choke levers on these twin 36mm Mikuni carburetors, so that's normal running. So for cold start, we press that lever in on that carburetor, and then this one here, and fire her up. And then very quickly just take one of these back on to normal running. The warm-up procedures just take a little while. It's a big engine. Rider's Handbook suggests 20 miles for warming the oil up thoroughly before, really opening her up. Certainly, a good few miles before the oil gets warm enough to really give it the beans. The chassis is this huge circular section tube which forms the main part of the chassis. It's bolted to each cylinder there, but it also doubles up as the oil tank, and the oil filler is here just in front of the fuel filler. Double purpose there, but it gave it additional rigidity for high-end performance for racing purposes. Mild steel construction, hand built at the factory in Rouen, and then nickel plated, which is what we see here today. One of the significant features of this chassis is that because it has the oil in the frame, it's kind of quite helpful to know how much oil's got. You actually got oil circulating, which classic bike owners will be familiar with, how important that is, and also have some kind of indication of what the levels are. And on this particular bike, one of Fritz Egli's sort of brilliant little design features are this level indicator here, where you can see the oil in this clear plastic tube that indicates the level of the oil in the gallery here. And also when it's running, you can see the oil circulating through this tube here. So while you're actually riding it, you can have a very quick visual check to see that you have adequate oil and that it's circulating.
Okay, one of the key things that Fritz Egli loved about the original Vincent was the fact that the engine is part of the frame. It supports other components rather than having a conventional frame which loops around the engine. And this really goes back to one of the tapes we've unearthed in making Speed is Expensive is Philip Vincent talking about how they designed the Series B at the very end of the war and the beginning of 1946. And what they did is Philip Vincent and Phil Irving did a life-size drawing on a wall based around the Series A, but obviously with the improvements. And according to Philip Vincent, they looked at the engine and they said that could support the motorcycle. We don't need a frame going around this. And that's really what Egli has built upon here. And it means you not only save weight because you've got less metal on the bike, the engine sits lower, which is always a good thing on a performance motorcycle. And you can drop the engine out rather than sort of pull it away. The engine on a Vincent and on an Egli kind of drops out if you need to do any work on it. The other thing which we've unearthed is not too many people know, Philip Vincent met Fritz Egli. I think it was at Church Lawford, which was a sprint in the mid-60s, and Fritz and his wife had come over on their modified but still standard Vincents. They'd driven over from Switzerland and did very well in the sprint. I think they got some firsts and seconds. And Philip Vincent was there and he'd heard about Fritz Egli's plans, and Fritz told me that he was really polite and very supportive, obviously very interested to see what would unfold. There's a bit of controversy about this because I think somewhere Philip Vincent says, well, why would you do that to my motorcycle? But from what Fritz Egli told me, and knowing what I know about Philip Vincent, I think he would be more encouraging because it was within the spirit of the Vincent. I think he would be less enamoured with a Norvin or anything else that's trying to put the Vincent into a conventional package. Because Vincent, if he was about anything, was being unconventional.
Other bits of the chassis, it has Maxton rear suspension units, box section swinging arm, again all the swinging arm made in the factory of course, and Cherry-Arney 35mm Grand Prix forks on the front. In terms of braking, we have a magnesium alloy 210mm 4-leading shoe Fontana front brake, which gives it adequate stopping power. And on the back it has a twin leading shoe Fontana replica magnesium alloy rear brake. Controls are very simple. A kill switch, start button, throttle obviously. On this side we have a headlamp flasher, a horn, left and right indicators and high and low beam. Couldn't be simpler, just very straightforward. The digital meters, if I just switch this on, you'll see that's just to verify that the meters are working, and you can see here on the odometer it's just showing 1981 miles from new. Classic bike riders will note we have the gear change on the wrong side, so to speak, because in order to comply with the Euro 3 regulations to which this bike was built, we have to have it on the left hand side.
One of the best rides of any motorcycle journey I took was flying over to Fritz's place in just north of Geneva, northwest I believe, meeting Patrick there with some of his friends on their Vincents, 2 Eglis and Patrick's Black Prince. And then I got in the sidecar and we spent a very long day going over the Alps down to the Italian Vincent Owners Club rally. With me in the sidecar with Fritz, it was the sidecar on the wrong side. So when you're overtaking, the sidecar on the wrong side in mainland Europe means you're in the middle of the road. But we developed a system of yes would mean go and that, because otherwise go and no sounds similar. And then once we got to the rally, Patrick very kindly lent myself and my brother a couple of these for the day. So we went into the beautiful countryside of northern Italy and spent a day. I mean, one can only be so impressed with these things. You'd think, you know, I'm used to riding older Vincents. You've always got to think about this is an old vehicle, even if it's just been restored. The lovely thing about these is, you know, 99.9% of the time you just think about the journey, you think about the line you're taking, because you know it will stop, you know it will accelerate, you know the indicators will work. And again, I'm not putting down any standard Vincents because I ride mine a lot, but there is something compelling about this still being a Vincent, but really being a performance motorcycle. Not a hyper performance one, but you know, with 70 or 80 brake horsepower. I mean, to my mind, that's the perfect number for a motorcycle, because if you get above that, you start to need, you know, anti-lock brake technology, and it all gets a bit different. For a classic motorcycle, that kind of power output is really good in the right package. The details are beautiful. Patrick's always been really good at making a motorcycle look complete. You know, some people called him an artist, but the difference between a really well done Egli-Vincent like the Godet and one that's been put together perhaps with less money, you know, less budget, is significant, because they are the same motorcycle, but you know, you just got to look at the clocks, you've got to look at how the stance of the motorcycle, whatever the specification, is beautiful. One other point about Fritz and Vincent, the early Egli-Vincents had this beautiful tank, it's called a banana tank, and it flowed down. So this model hasn't got it. And again, that was a direct sort of nod that Fritz wanted to make to the flow of the Vincent exhaust. So I guess I'm saying from the late 40s, you've got these wonderfully clever, inventive people like Philip Vincent, like Phil Irving, and then Fritz Egli, and then Patrick Godet. And all of their work is evidence in this motorcycle. So, you know, you're riding something that some wonderful people have had an input into. And they're great fun to ride. You know, they're not difficult to ride. They're very fast, but they're not so fast that you're nervous. And to me, that makes a great kind of touring sports motorcycle.
To my mind, this is more than the sum total of all the individual technical components which together create a magnificent machine. But on top of that, you have this sort of wonderful aesthetic as well. It just looks so fabulous. Thank you, Stephen. It's been an absolute pleasure to have been involved in this. And thank you, everybody, David and Patrick and Fritz. Although I've never met Fritz, I met Patrick a few times. You know, this is for me, it's the peak of motorcycling joy, having something like this in the garage to be able to go out and on a beautiful day and enjoy the countryside on a fabulous, iconic motorcycle.
If you enjoy our videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, click the notifications bell and give the video a like. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see more of our videos that we think you'll like.